Hello, this is a video workshop for the Introduction to Proportional Relationships Power Focus area for 7th grade students in Summit. And it's also important if you're trying to pass the proportional relationships and percentages power focus area because it depends on this one. So let's actually go over this. So the first skill you need to do is figure out how to fill out these tables of proportional relationships. It's very useful when trying to solve problems and to try to figure out the missing number in general. So to do this, our anchor chart that's attached to PFA tells us to name the right column Y and the left column X, and basically find K by doing Y over X. Now, if that's essentially saying the same thing as getting the right column divided by the left column for a line for which you have all the numbers. For example, I do know that the first line is 10 and 4, so I can use that line, and that's like I'm doing right here, and I get 10 divided by 4 is 2.5. So if by going this way, you divide by that 2.5, and you get 4. So if I was trying to go this way, I could multiply 8 times 2.5 and get 20. So that means every time you go left, you divide it by that K. Every time you go right, you multiply by that K. Of course, this only works if you start getting K by doing right divided by left, right? So you have to go in the same orientation as you use to find your K. I always do right divided by left. It's how I try to do it. So if I'm trying to find this 10, since I'm going right, I have to multiply times K. And so 10 times 2.5 gives you 25. And if I'm trying to go left to figure out this 40, I have to divide by my K. So I do 4 divided by 2.5, and I get 16. So that is essentially how you do this. Do note, if you're trying to do this and the K turns out not to be a nice, neat decimal, that you can leave it as a fraction instead when you're trying to do the math. And you're going to see that in an example that I'm going to talk about in the examples. So speaking of the examples, try these. You should pause the video before you actually see the resolution. Okay, so here are the answers. And the first one is just basically the same example we just did, right? So you may have noticed that. But the second one is basically, you can use the first line or the third line because they both have completed lines. But I used the first line and did 35 divided by 2 and you got 17.5. And then to go right, I have to multiply by that 17.5. So 3 times 17.5, you can use a calculator, gives us 52.5. And then that's what the same thing that this is saying, because you're going right again. So T times 17.5 is just 17.5 T. And that's basically a generalization of what you're doing to kind of try to find the right column. It helps you when trying to come up with an equation. But anyways, this second example here is an example that uses that kind of fraction that is not like a nice lead fraction. If you do 3 divided by 7, you end up with like a decimal that is not like nice neat decimal, it's a repeating decimal. So how to avoid or do the math in that case? I would just do it as a fraction. So for example, when you're trying to do 35 or 15 to go this way, since you know the case is 3/7, you would have to do 15 divided by 3/7. Now, when you divide by a fraction, that is the same thing as multiplying by its inverse. So that would be the same thing as doing 15 times 7 divided by 3. And that I can do it easily because 15 divided by 3 cancels out, and you get 5 times 7, which is 35. So in fact, if you leave it as a fraction, it might be even easier. Likewise, the 63 over here, if I'm trying to go from 63 to this 27, what I would have had to do is to multiply by my fraction. And so in this case, I would do 63 times the K, which is 3/7. And once again, this is divisible. 63 and 7s fit into each other. You get 9. So 9 times 3 gives you 27. So sometimes it's easier to leave the K as a fraction to do it with the fraction if you do it. But either way, the process is divide the right side by the left side to get a K, which could be a fraction or a nice decimal, and then use that to find the missing values. If you're going right to multiply, you're going left to divide. And that's essentially how you complete a table. On the next video, I'll continue talking about the next skill that has to do with proportions in 7th grade.